Cool.
Nice.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to Pure Hangouts. My name's Sophie Seawright. I'm the content editor of Pure London. It's happening in 2 weeks' time. So if you are a trade buyer, do register now. You can get your ticket on our website for free if you are a trade buyer. I am really excited to be joined today by two amazing guys who have started up British fashion businesses, which is especially relevant because Pure Menswear launches for the first time this season. Yeah, menswear is now a thing. My brothers and my dad don't realise it, but there is now fashion for men. And we're going to talk about that today. I'm really excited to be joined by both of them here. Jonathan and Simon, thank you so much for joining us. Traverse London to be here today. I'm going to kick off with you, Simon, if that's okay. Can you just tell us in brief about the Shackleton and what your business does?
Yes, I'm Simon Middleton and I run a brand called Shackleton, and we make menswear based on and inspired by imagery and the story of Ernest Shackleton, the Antarctic explorer, who exactly 100 years ago was trapped on the ice on the fringes of Antarctica, and one of the greatest adventures of exploration history, and he's our inspiration. And his granddaughter Alexandra is a part owner of the business, and that's the whole foundation of what we do. And
what, just in brief, what does your range include? I know you've got one of your lovely jackets behind you there.
Thank you. Yes, we started with knitwear. In fact, we started by making musical instruments. That's
a good one, yeah.
Come back to that. In clothing, we started with knitwear, like this sweater, which is a replica of Shackleton's from 100 years ago. Then we moved on to outerwear, and at Pure it'll be the first opportunity for the trade to see our small range of outerwear. And we make boots, and we make various accessories from socks to hats to scarves to gloves and so on.
Awesome. That accessory side of things actually is so useful to some of our women's wear retailers who are actually kind of looking to see slightly into menswear and take opportunity of that fantastic growth that there is there. So I think that will work really, really well. And Simon, Jonathan, can you just tell us a little bit about Brothers We Stand?
Yeah, Brothers We Stand is a menswear platform where you can find different designers that are designing sustainably and ethically. And yeah, basically we just search out these amazing designers who are really innovating in terms of how they make their products, bring them together in one place to make a really special collection.
Awesome. And yours is a consumer product, isn't it? And you're selling more to trade.
We're selling both. We sell direct to consumers on our own website, shackletoncompany.com. But we are building a trade stockist base in some really interesting places. So we're stocked in the Natural History Museum, for example. We're stocked in the Bike Shed Motorcycle Club, for example, and more conventional sort of boutiques as well.
Awesome. And actually, neither of you have a fashion background. You've both kind of come into it in the last couple of years, which is really exciting. And Simon, can you just tell me about why you decided to move into this sector and what the kind of early sort of inspirations were around
I'm not sure decided is quite the right word, but
came to the conclusion.
Well, yes, I'm now looking back on it. I find myself in it. It's yes, my background was in advertising, marketing, branding, and for about 20 years. Started as an advertising copywriter and moved into various other things. And I had planned for some time to start my own branded business. And the first one I started was oriented towards musical instruments. And about 2 years ago, I opened, sounds strange to everyone who's hearing it for the first time, opened the first banjo factory in Britain for about 60 years. And we called our product the Shackleton because the banjo had a significant role in Shackleton's adventures. And people literally asked us what else we had that was inspired by the same story with the same aesthetic. So we started with this jumper, and suddenly I found myself running a fashion brand, and that's the part that's really sort of taken off into a much wider audience, because of course we still make beautiful handmade instruments, but they have by definition a fairly restricted audience, whereas everybody buys jumpers. So that's how I got into it.
Awesome. And Jonathan, you've got a completely different story, haven't you? How did you arrive at the career that you're in now?
Well, it's a bit similar to Simon, that it just sort of happened. But I graduated university and always been interested in business, and then just noticed that there were a few designers, a growing number of designers, designing sustainably really nice stuff. And I just had the idea it'd be cool to bring them together and chat it through with friends, made a business plan, spent about a year planning, then got a loan from the Prince's Trust to start it. It was just £3,100, but that was enough to just get it going and start doing things.
That's awesome. And what was your degree in?
International development.
Okay. It's just, I do think it's so interesting that really you haven't gone for the kind of the fashion school, figure out business and then launch a fashion brand. And I think it's just really encouraging for people to hear that if clothing is their passion, you can come at it from a variety of different angles.
Definitely. I think Yeah. It's like anything, you can learn it. If you put the
Yeah.
time to reading and studying, you can learn.
And Simon, tell me about the early days of the fashion side of the business, because you obviously had lots of interesting funding routes that you went down. How did it all sort of look in the early days?
Quite scary in the early days, but it's now getting real traction, and we're feeling now that the sort of last 2 years of effort is really kind of showing dividends.
Yeah.
But from a funding perspective, it's quite interesting and somewhat unusual. We started with we had a small investor early on who backed us really before our ideas had formed, going back three and a half years, and that was enough to sort of give us some money in the bank and a bit of confidence. But then 2 years ago, in the autumn of 2013, just over 2 years ago, I launched a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign and to launch the Banjo Factory. We raised £50,000 in advance orders. That's essentially how the crowdfunding works on Kickstarter. You tell the story, people pledge money in return for a product, ranging from a promotional item, a T-shirt or tin mug or whatever, through to the actual instrument. And we shifted in advance £50,000 worth of product, which gave us not only money in the bank, but the confidence and a sort of market testing, if you like. But what that also did was bring us to the attention, first of Shackleton enthusiasts, who then started to say, what else have you got? People were buying banjos who don't play the banjo because they love the story and they love the fact we're making in Britain. That was a big part of our thing. But what it also did was bring on into the sort of bring us to the attention of angel investors, people with serious amounts of money who loved the story, who were looking for small companies to invest in. And we raised many tens of thousands of pounds additional to that. Then a year later, we did another Kickstarter campaign to launch the clothing brand. We raised another 35,000 or so, again in advance orders, and yet more equity funding that way. So because I'm a late starter in terms of my age, new to the fashion business, late in life, as it were, I had to move very fast. So we've raised money fast, we've sold equity in the business fast. And for us, it's paid off. It's given us traction. And now here we are at Pure and with retailers and getting media coverage and so on.
Yeah. And bearing in mind, if somebody else was looking at starting a fashion brand or a fashion business and they want to do it quickly and they're prepared to lose some of their equity in the business, would you recommend the strategy that you've gone down? Do you think that it's worked well in hindsight?
It's worked really well for us. It's hard to recommend because I'm not sure there's a right way. I think if I was 30 years younger, I might have done it differently. But I'd set my goal very high to make an international luxury brand, which is a big thing to decide to do in your mid-50s. And the only serious way of doing that is to raise serious amounts of money very fast, because you've got to sell an awful lot of sweaters to raise the money to achieve that. So we knew we had to have external funding, and so equity funding combined with crowdfunding. I think that's the clever thing. Looking back, what we managed to do was combine the two. I would recommend it depending on your stage of life and career. But for someone else, for Jonathan, it might be utterly inappropriate. It might be you might want to do something completely different. Well,
speaking of Jonathan, you obviously went down a completely different route and started off with the Prince's Trust, which is awesome. It's one of my favourite charities. And I'm really glad that it's obviously really panned out well. But you were living at home at that time, weren't you? And you've kind of gone for a more organic situation. How did the kind of early days of the business look from a financial perspective and the kind of funding process?
Yeah, well, so we didn't have much money, as I said at the beginning. So we had to do things on a very small budget. But actually, it is possible to do that. For example, if you're making a website, you can use a template and maybe cost £120 for a template. And you can, if you design that well, you can make something that looks pretty strong, enough to get your initial sales. And it is hard work because you can't pay people. But I was very fortunate that various friends were able to help out with things. I think if you can hustle a bit and just try and make things happen without too much money, it's a really good opportunity to test things and learn what works. Whereas for me, because I was very new to this, if I'd have got a big amount of money at the beginning, I think I would have burnt that money and wasted it. Because while we're going through that learning curve, it was really good to do that without losing too much money. And now we've kind of moved to a place where we're kind of getting to where we've kind of got stuff worked out and know what we're doing. Potentially now we're in a position to scale up. So for me, it's been really valuable to take it slowly and go through that learning curve before getting a big investment. but it has taken time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, if you do that, it doesn't necessarily go rapidly. So
Yeah.
you know, it's not. It depends how you
More
want
of
to
an
do
organic
it.
growth. Yeah.
Yeah.
And forgive my stupid question. What would have been your biggest sort of single expenditure in those early days? And you had a small amount of money.
Yeah.
What was your sort of biggest outlay?
Well, because we're a retailer working with different brands, we don't actually have to produce anything.
Yeah.
Because of our business model as well, I think sent direct from designers. So I guess we were quite smart in that way and working out a business model which didn't really require that much investment. And the biggest thing we did spend money on was probably the website. But if I was to do it again, I wouldn't have spent as much money as we did, because we could have done it cheaper. There were a couple of friends I met from my waiting work who I paid to do a few things. But in hindsight, some of the things, they were amazing and really helpful. But some of the things they did, I could have just done on a template for free. So
it's really not that much of a kind of initial expenditure, is there? It's really awesome actually that it's so accessible that really is
literally
possible. If you're really passionate about it, you're prepared to work 24 hours a day, then it is feasible.
Yeah, and it is, but it is hard work, because it means you have to do everything. You know, you've got to do the marketing, the accounting, the product buying, and I'm sure it's when even any business is difficult, and so it is a bit of a hustle, but it doesn't have to take over your life. You can do other things.
Still eat and sleep and stuff sometimes.
Yeah,
that's really cool. The reason why I find it so inspiring is because a lot of fantastic fashion students come along to Pure.
Yeah.
And getting into the fashion industry in London as in anywhere else is extremely grueling.
Yeah.
So it's great to hear that it's achievable, and you don't necessarily need to acquire a huge amount of money beforehand if it's not something you can access.
There's a difference between our two businesses are very
huge difference.
So you've got a retail platform,
which,
as you said, you haven't had to sort of manufacture or anything.
Yeah,
someone else is doing. We've got we're a branded manufacturer.
Yeah,
and so we needed the money to pay for development, but also particularly for minimum production runs.
Yeah.
So
with a completely different business model, you'd have struggled with £3,000 as a kickoff. Yeah.
Well, we could have made some sweaters, that's for sure. We could have done that, because knitwear is, relatively speaking, less expensive than. But if you're going to get into outerwear, footwear, and things like that, you've got minimum order quantities are substantial, quite rightly, because factories have to make a living, and factories don't want to be messed around. So you have to commit, and if you're going to commit, then suddenly you find yourself with a bill that's 5 figures, and you really need to have the resource to do that.
Yeah, of course.
So yes, you're right that people can get into fashion without being loaded or without selling their souls. That's absolutely true. But there are some areas of it that are relatively easy, and some that are slightly more challenging.
Yeah, for sure.
Manufacturing is slightly more challenging.
Yeah.
It does need some money.
Definitely. I wouldn't argue against that at all.
What you did with the banjos first, because you'd had the first business with the banjos, which was in some ways was a smaller scale. You did that, and that was successful, and then you knew you could move to the next stage, and that's what I would.
Although being successful in manufacturing musical instruments is no guarantee of success in the fashion world.
Who'd have thought it?
They're not the same. But yes, I take your point. I did learn during the year and a half or 2 years of kind of creating the banjo business, if you like. I learned an awful lot of tough lessons about what it's like to run a factory, what it's like to buy materials, what it's like to market and sell a product as opposed to an idea, which is what I used to do when I worked in marketing and advertising. And you learn some hard lessons that way, and they have informed what we now do. So every day's a school day. I know it's kind of corny, but it's true. Whether you're mid-20s or mid-50s, we're learning every day about a business that 2 years ago probably neither of us knew anything about. So that's what makes it exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that.
We talk about your consumers a little bit, because they differ as well, and over the process of the last couple of years, you've come to realise what they want and what they're prepared to pay for it, and what their sort of primary concerns are. Simon, in terms of your consumer, is there a sort of a profile that they would normally fit into, a demographic?
It's a changing profile actually for ours, because we began as a musical instrument manufacturer, and we were making a sort of a traditional folk instrument. The majority of our consumers to start with, the end user, as it were, the majority of them were middle-aged blokes, let's say, sort of 45 plus. 90% of them were men, and 90% of them were age 45, 50 and upwards. So they were the first consumers of our knitwear. But our demographic has been changing, and quite rapidly. So the age is dropping, the average age is dropping, partly because we're now in sort of boutiques. So we're in Dandy Lab in Spitalfield, which is a trendy boutique aimed at sort of affluent young professional men. We're in the motorcycle, the Bike Shed Motorcycle Club, which covers quite a wide age range, but these are cool biker dudes, you know. So we're in the Natural History Museum now, which is very oriented towards the tourist market, and a lot of those are young adults, and so our demographic is changing. That's really interesting and exciting, but we haven't sort of controlled that. We've sort of followed what the customer wants. But then we've been hearing back from those different new customers certain things that they like about what we do, and certain things they would like us to do differently. Badging has been one of the things. Yeah,
that's really interesting.
So we've adapted to that. So when we began, for example, and this sweater I'm wearing now is badged quite strongly, as it were. It's a big patch on there. That was very appropriate when we began, but our next iteration of knitwear, it'll be much more subtle, and we're sort of moving up market as well. So our outerwear, for example, has just got a very beautifully embroidered little icon on it.
You've got it on there, haven't you? Can you show it on your jacket?
So because we've moved from the middle-aged banjo playing market, although they're still really important to us, we're moving into sort of luxury fashion, where branding needs to be more discreet and lets the product speak rather than a great big badge. So that's been an interesting thing. The demographics changed, and we've learned from the new people.
And has the feedback, sorry, you might have mentioned this, but does the feedback come from your end user in terms of, for instance, the badge, or is it coming from the retailers that you're now stocked with?
Both, actually. The retailers, let's say, for example, Natural History Museum was our first major retail opportunity. They have a beautiful boutique right in the middle of the Natural History Museum called the Cranbourne Boutique. They only opened last November.
Okay.
And we're the only clothing brand in there. And the feedback that we got from the buyers there was they really loved what we were doing, but they wanted the branding to be slightly more subtle, because this coat originally had a great big patch on the shoulder, which more expeditionary.
Sure.
So we responded to that, and we've also responded to that comment from one or two individual consumers. For example, someone on the Bike Shed Motorcycle Club's website said they did a review of one of our sweaters as though it were a piece of motorcycle gear. And someone said, we really love this sweater. This is fantastic under a leather jacket, keeps you warm, and the air is, it's an insulator and so on. But we're cool guys, basically. I'm paraphrasing. We're cool guys. We really don't need a big badge. So we're listening to all of that. We're turning it down, because people can buy into the story without needing to wave a big flag saying I'm wearing a Shackleton. Sort of. So that's part of my learning, I suppose. Part of my learning.
And the price bracket that you're in is slightly different to the one that Jonathan's in. How did you come to the conclusion that was the right bracket for you, and what kind of feedback did you take into account there?
I think, we started at what you might call premium. If there were three very crude layers, if you like, of sort of high street premium luxury, I know it's much more complex than that, but let's imagine there's those three. We started in the premium level. Very, very good quality, made in Britain. That's what, so far, everything's made in Britain. Now that, once you've made the commitment to make in Britain, certain, you have to take as read, there's going to be a certain price impact. So we were never going to be kind of low end of the high street, and even upper end of the high street was more challenging, but the sort of premium, smaller outlets and so on. But we became more ambitious about the kind of things we wanted to make, including outerwear. So the outerwear is much more complex than knitwear. For example, we wanted to use the best materials. So this is 100% wool, very heavy as well, very heavy wool.
It does weigh a ton, I can confirm.
It weighs a lot. It's very different from there's lots of peacoats out there, but they don't all look like this or feel like this. And we decided to make it in the Midlands, as opposed to making it outside of the UK. And that demands a certain focus on pricing. The only way you can really, really succeed at that is by going higher up the market. And that's just the reality. And also, lower down the market, people are less concerned about whether things are made in Britain, and that's because they can't afford to be that concerned. So that the whole made in Britain thing presses far more buttons the further up you go.
Sure.
And so that's the decision we've made. I'm not saying that's the right decision. There isn't a right or wrong. There's just, you just have to make a choice.
Just the way the business works.
You can't do it all.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
that's where we've got.
Yeah.
So sort of premium meets luxury territory.
And Jonathan, you've got an ethical business, but you've got a slightly different consumer, haven't you?
Yeah.
And different price bracket. How did all that come about?
As similar to Simon, it's been a process of working out and evolving over time. One thing I quite like about Brothers We Stand is that we have quite a broad range of customers.
Yeah.
And what they all basically have in common is that they want really nice products that are made in a way that's conscious of the impact on the production process, on its impact on people and the environment. But those people, our customers, do vary quite a lot. I think more than a lot of fashion brands will have a very clear sense of who their target customer is, and I think that's normally very important. But I guess because we stock various brands, but we've noticed that it's quite a range of people buying from Brothers We Stand, which is something I really like.
Absolutely. And in terms of the price bracket you've achieved, I think a lot of retailers who are watching will be thinking about stocking brands and products with a strong story, a strong ethical story like the ones that you'll have, but would be assuming that the price bracket is going to be quite high to achieve that. But actually, you've got very reasonable prices.
Yeah.
How have you and your suppliers gone about achieving that?
Well, for example, this top is made from really good quality cotton, and it costs, I think it's £45. It's a really good price. It's amazing, made in London, made in price for what it is. So basically, the brands we work with are really special, and they're doing amazing things, and they've really looked very close at their supply chains and worked out how to make brilliant products at a good price for the market that we're going for, the customers community that we're wanting to reach. All of their stories are different. Some of them, basically, like someone was saying, if you want to produce, a jumper in the UK, it's not necessarily possible to do it at a certain price point. But if you think about using outside the box end of line materials, which is a really great story, but they're also slightly cheaper to get hold of, or maybe you find a really great factory in India that's actually an amazing factory, and you work with them to make really nice items. Some of our designers are doing that. Or in Portugal, again, costs are slightly lower, but really good quality jersey. So it's the brands we work with all have in common that they've just spent a lot of time looking at their supply chain with a real clear focus on the price they want their garment to be. And, they've put, it's great.
That's what they're in the time that, haven't they?
Yeah.
And you made a really good point earlier that a lot of the high street brands will be using hundreds or even thousands of factories, and some of them are fantastic and some of them are not fantastic, and the suppliers that you're working with have chosen ones that are doing a great job, and they've got good visibility on the welfare standards that are being achieved there, etc.
I think
that's a really good point.
That's the luxury of being a upcoming designer that's not producing at the same scale as these massive brands, that you don't need to have 1,000 factories. You maybe only need one factory, so you can put lots of effort into making sure that one factory is an amazing factory, and that's really possible to do. And then you've got your product you can really be proud of, and you've got a great story to that product. And it does take a bit of time to find that great factory, but we've got some good contacts. Designers can get in touch with us. We're always keen to help upcoming designers find good suppliers, and there's various other people who can help people with that process. So it's really worth putting the time into, because then you get a product with a great story that you're really proud of, and that is differentiated to a lot of the bigger brands.
Because I know that you're obviously not looking for the factories yourself, because you're choosing the suppliers. Was it a quite a difficult process to find the suppliers that matched up with your remit, or did they sort of fall into your lap, or what was the kind of the difficulty there?
It is difficult. With looking for brands, it's really difficult to find brands that meet our standard. We have really high standards, and we really want to work with the brands that are really innovating, in a sense, the brands of the future that are producing things in a sustainable way. They're tough to find those, and you have to ask lots of questions to find out and dig into their supply chains. So that's difficult. And then also, we'll talk a little bit about we're looking into doing our own project, and so we've been looking for a partner for that, and that's taken a long time and been difficult. But we've now got someone on the ground in the country who's helping us, and so it's just kind of trying to connect with the right people who can help you find these factories or workshops. So it's always difficult, but it's worth it, and there are the right people out there who you can get advice from and resources to make it happen. and it's totally worth it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really working out well for you, and there's obviously a niche there, so that's brilliant.
I mean, really, we don't want it to be. It is a niche at the moment, so it definitely is a niche. Actually, you're completely right. But we're really passionate that I'm really passionate that all ideas start out on a niche, and then they grow from there. You can never go straight to the mainstream. You have to start, with a niche. So we're quite interested in the journey that kind of sustainable production is going on in society. That at the moment it is a niche thing with a small group of people interested in it. But I think over the next, 10, 15 years, it will become adopted more and more widely and just become the new norm. That's what I'd love to see happen.
Yeah, for sure. You made the really good point earlier as well, actually, that even if you doubled the amount that you were paying the person that produces the product in the Far East or wherever else, that still only adds such a tiny margin of cost onto the actual product that you'd have thought actually there is a potential to find great factories that are paying more to their staff because it is such a minor part of the eventual cost.
And it doesn't need to result in a product which has to be a much higher price point. It is possible to produce things sustainably and ethically at a very accessible price point. It's very difficult, but it's possible. And at the same time, there's always a place for luxury products. But if you want to produce something, like this jacket sells for £155. It's a really good technical jacket. Very, technical capacity is very compatible with a lot of the big brands. But it's made from 80 plastic bottles, and it's got sustainably sourced down, no live plucked geese, which happens in a lot of big brands. And the guys are managing to sell it £155. It's possible. It's difficult. Yeah. But it makes a very special product.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. The revolution only comes about if there's lots of different methods of attack. So I'm pleased with that.
Yes.
Simon, can you just tell me about your supply chain for your favourite product? Because I know you're making, for the majority of products, you're making it mostly in Britain. How does the supply chain look?
Well, at the moment, everything we make is made in Britain. There may well come a time in the next couple of seasons when we might introduce products made outside of the UK, but that not as a replacement, but just as additional products that, for whatever reason, aren't feasible to make in the UK.
Sure.
But right now, we make everything in Britain, and that's part of our story. And the best example, probably, is our knitwear. So this sweater, for example, now I can't tell you which sheep it was shorn from, but I can tell you which company produces the yarn, and that company will be able to tell you exactly which wool growers they got it from. It's certified wool. We know the yarn company that it comes from. The yarn company supplies the knitwear factory in Leicestershire directly, and so it's a very short chain. So even if you count the sheep farmer is 1, the yarn company is 2, the factory is 3, we're 4.
Job is a good one.
Consumer is 5.
Yeah.
Or if you put the retailer in, that's 6.
Yeah.
So it's a very short chain, and that's kind of what makes it exciting for me. So I'm equally concerned and passionate about doing things ethically. We've just gone about a slightly different route. So the making in Britain has its challenges, but it also has the great virtue that I can speak directly and easily to the people who are actually making the stuff. I can visit the factories. I know I've been to every factory that makes all of our clothing, from footwear to outerwear to accessories to knitwear. I've met the people who are working on the sewing machines and so on, and that's a really nice thing to be able to do. And I can do that without traveling up and down the A14 is not the best fun in the world, but it's a lot more achievable than flying to China or flying to India or whatever. So I can be in direct contact with our producers.
Aside from the obvious travel cost bonus, are there any other kind of commercial advantages to having such a short local supply chain?
Yeah, I think there are. There's minimums are lower.
Yeah.
So I can produce 50 sweaters if I wanted to, or fewer, in fact. Turnaround is faster, so I don't have to wait for things to come either on a slow boat or on an expensive aeroplane.
Yeah.
Things can come in the post. Samples can come in the post the next day. That's a beautiful thing. There's advantages like that. Actually, design meetings are much easier. I can drive with my designer to the Midlands or to Scotland, or actually we're meeting this coming week with a factory that we may well be working with, which is only 20 miles from where I live. So
fantastic.
That's enormous advantage. It comes at a cost, and the cost is that people get paid much, much higher wages, because that's what we've, fought and come to expect in this country over the last sort of 150 years, and quite right. So it comes at a cost. So there's a much higher sort of actual cost per unit.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's all these other advantages.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for the moment, it works very well for us. Yeah.
Fantastic. And my final question, what are both of your plans for the next 12 months and 5 years? Jonathan, I'll start with you.
Oh, just to continue taking it forward step by step. We've got a big vision. As I said, I'm really passionate that considering how our products are made can be something that it just becomes more and more important to our society. And I want to be part of that through what I'm doing with the business, and just continue increasing the product range we offer, just continue providing people with brilliant products that are sustainably made, step by step, increasing our impact.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Simon, what do you reckon? 12 months and 5 years?
12 months, we want to have a much wider range of outerwear. We're probably going to double the range of outerwear, and probably the same with knitwear and so on. So the range will expand, but it will always have this, we're just going to take more images and more stories about Shackleton and similar people and develop that. So, and also in 12 months, we want to be in a much wider range of retailers of the right sort. 5 years, I may well be retired in 5 years. Let's see. But what my ambition is that within 5 years, and it's part of our business plan, in fact, 5 years from this spring, is that we should have built an internationally recognized luxury menswear brand. So that's a big ambition, but we've made a hell of a lot of progress.
Yeah, exactly. That is super.
So I'm very happy.
That is extremely punchy, but Simon, I back you completely to do it.
Thank you.
These guys have been absolutely amazing, and thank you both so much for joining us. Simon and Jonathan are both going to be at Pure, so if you would like to meet them and grill them further, they'll be, I'm sure, happy to take your questions. Sorry, guys, completely dropped you in it there. My next hangout is going to be with, yeah, tickety-boo. My next hangout is with Claudia Batista, who is the head of women's wear buying at House of Fraser. I'm going to be interviewing her on the first day of Pure. But yeah, we'll see you at Pure, and thank you so much for joining us.